Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
So the very first time I came up there, it was to moderate that debate when you were running the first time. And Bob Vanderplas took me to some restaurant, and you get this little bitty bun, and then you get this fried pork sandwich. And it's like a sheet of paper with a little bun, and I've craved the sandwich ever since. Y'all know how to cook up there beyond corn.
We do, and of course, many of you have probably seen we have the Iowa State Fair going on right now.
Oh, yes.
So if you want food that's either deep fried or on a stick, you can come to the Iowa State Fair. I had a pickle dog that was deep fried. Okay, yeah, crazy, but it was actually really delicious. So I ate that yesterday with some fried Oreos.
And you're here today.
And a deep fried rattlesnake corn dog.
Okay.
Which I shouldn't say, but it was a little chewy. So. That was not, the pickle dog was the favorite.
Thank you for surviving and coming to Georgia today. So, I know your background in the Senate, and I want to talk to you about the cyber issues because this has come up a couple of times here, and I don't know that people appreciate it enough that we have so integrated our national networks, power grid, water supply, and the like. And we've discovered, like, for example, it was somewhere on the Mississippi River, the power company, or the water company rather, was using like Windows 3.1 still on their systems and had gotten hacked. And I don't know that we as Americans are as concerned as we should be with the vulnerability of everything being on the internet like it is.
Oh, well, you're right, Eric. And we have seen the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, the head of that organization, just state in the last week or so that they know Chinese hackers are preparing for an attack on our infrastructure. So think about those Chinese hackers that will find their way into our power plants and affecting our power grid, into our other utility companies, into our railroads. You think about banking systems in private industry. All of that is subject to Chinese hackers. And the Biden administration right now as well, they are trying to do a deep dive into our cyber infrastructure to find what they believe is hidden Chinese code. So they're trying to do a sweep of all of these programs to find out, have they buried code either in the software or the hardware? And I feel that we have waited far too long to engage in this space. I do want to reassure everybody that we do pay attention as Congress. In my subcommittee on the armed services, which is emerging threats and capabilities, obviously we have a Department of Defense focus on artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, all of those issues. But bottom line, it's so hard for federal government to keep up with what's going on in private industry. So to regulate cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, all of these other areas, we're at that Windows 3. And we're trying to keep up. But to regulate that, it's very difficult. So I think that we just need to form guardrails and ways of protecting ourselves, and then work with private industry as they're making these rapid advances.
So the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats of Senate Armed Services, so you're the one I need to ask about the UFOs.
Actually, yes.
Okay, so I have a theory, and look, I know there are things that you can't say publicly,
Right.
but I have a theory that we're not actually seeing aliens. We may be seeing other nations testing us who may be deploying more advanced technology, that we've had this presumption for so long that China is still so far behind us. And in a lot of ways they are. But I mean, what if we've got nations out there, China in particular, trying to leapfrog us with
Never
technology?
assume. I mean, never assume, Eric. And yes, so we actually did have a hearing in the Senate, Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee, not all that long ago. And the Democratic chair is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. And so we did focus on the unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, and we do have actually a new agency within the Department of Defense. We brought in the head of that organization, and they did play some film footage, and they were able to identify for us a number of the UAP that showed up in films. But there actually are a number that have showed up in films and photography that's been done by naval aviators and so forth that they can't identify. But they're physicists, they are scientists that study movement, and there are oftentimes very simplistic reasons. Things are showing up the way they are in film, and there are still, though, things that they can't explain.
It's just, it's fascinating just because my mind does not rush towards little green men, but little nefarious Chinese agents.
Absolutely.
And I just think that if it were aliens, it's just remarkable that they always show up around our military installations in no other countries, which tells me a lot. Funny how that works. I mean, if it was aliens, they'd be going to the Iowa State Fair to check out a fried Twinkie.
They are there. They are there already.
But but back to the more practical reality of this with these technologies and software and hardware even, that are the global banking system, so much of it runs through the United States. Right. Our power grid and stuff, even hospitals, could be really vulnerable in a next level war where, as Xi Jinping has said, he thinks we're fighting a smokeless war. Well, there's no smoke in a computer hack, and yet we could be behind the ball on this.
Right, and this is an area that goes unobserved by most folks out in Main Street, Iowa, United States. And that's okay. Maybe they shouldn't have to have that burden of worrying that their banking information or their utilities aren't protected. We should be focusing on that for them as Congress, as the federal government, as a state government. We should pay attention to that. Our American lives are heavily burdened in so many other ways. We should make sure that they are protected. Between government, between private industry, we should find a way to keep nefarious actions from happening. But fact of the matter is that the Chinese are out there. They are focusing on this. Russia is focusing on this. Iran is focusing on this. They are trying to find ways into our daily lives. They are trying to disrupt our civil society. And there are so many ways that they can do that. We are dependent upon our phones and GPS. Think what would happen if all of those systems went down and we weren't able to look up directions on our phone, or if we weren't able to call to work, if we weren't able to connect on a Zoom, whatever it is.
Okay, some of that, I got to be honest, doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, it's probably okay. But we are so reliant upon technology, and we have a huge vulnerability when it comes to technology. And it's what, in the defense space, we call that gray zone. We operate in the gray zone. It's neither black nor white. It is an area exists where adversaries can compete against each other in a way that would be considered just short of war. So how do we regulate within that gray zone? How do we operate within that gray zone? Because certainly, if we have adversaries that are attempting to hack us, and we talk about this in open forums in the Senate Armed Services Committee, but if we have an adversary like China that comes after us and we know that they are targeting our federal government agencies, what are we doing in return? What can we do in retaliation that makes sense and would deter them from coming after us again? So we operate in that gray space as well. So if they're coming after us, we are going to retaliate and go back against them. But there are not necessarily written regulations or rules on what constitutes an all-out threat. So that's why we have to have trust that those decision makers are doing the right thing in that gray zone.
I want to step back just a little bit and let you tell your story a little bit. Joni Ernst goes to the military, gets out of the military, runs for office in Iowa, and is now in the United States Senate. Can you just talk a little bit about your path in life for the audience?
Oh, gosh. Thank you, Eric. I would say, I'd like to say I'm extraordinary, but I think I'm like everyday Iowa. You talk about, riding a Harley Davidson. I grew up on motorcycles on the farm. I grew up on a farm in southwest Iowa. My dad and mom had a very small farm, family farm. We raised hogs, corn, and soybeans. And I have an older sister, a younger brother, and we all grew up doing chores. I mean, that's just expected. That's normal. That's just normal. I see some heads nodding. I mean, you grow up doing those activities. You're expected to work and contribute to your family. So I went to school. I graduated high school at the top of my class, folks, from high school, right? All 24 of us in my graduating class. But I loved it. Those are all young men and women that we all grew up together, literally from kindergarten. Many of us went from kindergarten through Iowa State University. And it's a tight community, and it's a community that helps one another out. And during the 80s, of course, it was really tough for farmers, and we saw a lot of farms that were going under. Banks were taking land back from those farmers and foreclosing on mortgages. And my dad, he was a hard worker. And he said, okay, we're gonna make it. I'm gonna start a secondary job. I'm gonna do heavy construction. And all of us kids helped with that as well. And we made ends meet. And that's what it was to grow up in southwest Iowa. I still live there today. I live about 8 miles from the farm I grew up on. So very simple, humble beginnings, and went to Iowa State University. And I'm the only child in my family that has a 4-year degree. My sister, she worked her way through community college, and my brother went straight into the workforce and works for a railroad as a union laborer. So those are the people that I love. Those are the people that I go home to every weekend. But I did have that opportunity to go to Iowa State. And while I was there was a life-changing experience for me. I was selected to go as one of 18 students from the state of Iowa to go on an ag exchange. And this was in 1989. And I was off for the first time ever on an airplane flying into the Soviet Union. And I went to a collective farm in Ukraine where I farmed with a family there over the summer 1989. And it really has impacted me significantly because when we got there, the family that I was housed with, they didn't have running water. They didn't have a refrigerator. They had one television with state-sponsored programming on it. They had no telephone. And when we came together in the evening, all of us students and the Ukrainians, they asked us questions, and it was an agricultural exchange. So I expected they were going to talk to us about Iowa farming versus their collective farming, and we didn't talk about that at all. So I've asked this question many times, but it was an ag exchange, so what do you think they might have asked? Again, I anticipate they'd ask about, what kind of livestock do you have? Or, they asked what it was like to be an American. And it struck me very hard, I think, at that point, because I have always been a proud American. I've always been a proud American. I had very humble beginnings, and my family is still from humble beginnings. But growing up the way I did, I still had so much more than that family I lived with in Ukraine. I mean, they were living in abject poverty with no phone, no car, no refrigerator.
And only PBS to watch.
And only Russian or Soviet PBS to watch, which was horrible. But it just demonstrated to me how incredibly fortunate we are to live in such a magnificent country. And it wasn't lost upon them either. And several years then after that exchange is when the Soviet Union fell apart. And those countries that had comprised the Soviet Union were, at least many of them, were trying to make their way in democracies, much like the United States. And so, I do have a part of my heart that still is with Ukraine and wants to see them succeed, absolutely see them succeed. So that changed the trajectory of my life. I truly believe that exchange changed the way I was moving forward in my life. So after that exchange, I got back to Iowa State University, and I decided that I can't continue to take my country for granted anymore. So I joined Army ROTC, and I decided this is the way I can give back. I don't come from a family of means, so I will give my time and my treasure, my blood, I guess, if called upon. And so I went into the Army Reserves, and I served for 23 years between the Reserves and the Iowa Army National Guard. I did deploy overseas for Operation Iraqi Freedom, and I was a company commander at that time. So I had 150 men and women, my truck drivers, my mechanics, just extraordinary Iowans that really all came together. I had brothers that were serving together. I had a husband-wife that deployed with me, left their 1-year-old daughter at home with grandma, and went with me to Kuwait and Iraq. And cousins, I had an uncle and a nephew. It's very typical of National Guards. And you have a lot of family members that serve together. My father actually had served in the same unit that I commanded. He had been a young mechanic 30 years prior to my deployment with that unit. And we ran convoys in Kuwait and southern Iraq, and then came back after that deployment. And I decided, okay, I want to continue to serve. And I ran for local government office. I was a county auditor and commissioner of elections, and went on to serve in the state Senate, and then was called to serve in the United States Senate. I retired in 2015 from the Iowa Army National Guard, and it was truly, I think, one of the most difficult decisions to make is stepping out of uniform.
Daniel, oh, there we go. Look at that.
We can share. But it is just to wrap it up, though. I served with some of the best people, the cloth of America. Everyone that I worked with came from different backgrounds and had different reasons for serving. But I have seen the best of America in those uniforms, and love the service that I provide in the United States Senate. But truly one of the greatest honors of my life was serving in a uniform and boots.
Well,
and my daughter, I'll end on this. When you all get discouraged, because a number of us do with what's going on across the United States today, but my daughter is now serving active duty in the United States Army. And all I have to do is look at her and look at her soldiers, look at the young men and women that are serving in uniform, and I know our country is going to be okay.
Well, thank you
They're
very
going
much
to be
for your
okay.
service.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Let's talk about Iowa for a minute, because I've been there now a couple of times, and it's always on the campaign trail, and I always try to rent a car and leave Des Moines because there's so much more to Iowa than Des Moines, and you fly in for the Iowa caucuses and that's where you go. And it's this beautiful state. Having grown up overseas, and particularly in the desert in the Middle East, and then go to some place where in the wintertime it's that cold and all the time, and you have these hot summers, and people think of Iowa's farm country and field of dreams, but there's this huge financial center and banks in Des Moines that I don't think people pay attention to. But then you do have farmers and an administration in Washington that wants to convert them all to battery-powered tractors and EVs to power the land, and it doesn't seem to make any sense.
Oh, have you been hearing my rants lately?
I've been having my own. It makes no
Erick,
sense.
Oh my gosh. There we go. So, do you want me to keep that here?
We've had a long day.
So truly, this administration they've got this goal within the next 5 or so years that we're all going to be driving electric vehicles. And there might be some of you that are driving electric vehicles, and I'm not going to knock you, okay, because it's about consumer choice. But, folks, when you have a president and an administration that is saying you are going to drive an electric vehicle, then we've got a problem. Okay, so when we're talking about the makeup of those batteries, and it all goes back to China, right? So China controls 90% of the rare earth elements that are found in the world, and they control 50% of the global capacity for critical minerals. And most of it, regardless of where it's found, is refined in China. So when we're building all of these batteries for these electric vehicles, we are enriching China in one way or another. These electric vehicles, when we look at the critical minerals that go into them, the rare earth elements, 6 times more amount than a conventional vehicle goes into an electric vehicle. So the Biden administration, a year ago, when we were going through the Defense Authorization Act, because not just tractors, but think about our military vehicles. The Biden administration, their focus at the time was transitioning the entire military non-tactical vehicle fleet to electric within 5 years. What? Okay, so, and that's the non-tactical vehicle fleet. So that's not tanks yet. But the goal was to start with the non-tactical vehicle fleet and move all the way through until we had an entirely electrified military. Yes. So I think about, so again, I was with a transportation company. I was running convoys in Kuwait, picking up supplies, and then pushing those north into Iraq, dropping them off at Talil Air Force Base, Baghdad International Airport, all of these other bases, logistical bases in Iraq, right? Okay, so you get a convoy of trucks running up through Iraq. Can you imagine? Hello, Mr. Iraqi, where's the nearest charging station? It doesn't work like that. So instead of focusing on making our military the most lethal fighting force on the face of the planet, we're focused on green ideology, even in combat zones. So this president, in his 48-page national security strategy, he mentioned China only 9 times. He mentioned climate change 63 times in 48 pages. That's the entire focus of this administration. Again, instead upon, focusing upon the resourcing for our men and women in uniform, making sure that they have the equipment, the training they need, so that if we are deploying them somewhere around the world, that we bring them home safely. I mean, that should be our goal. Instead of that, they're focusing on electric vehicles for our military. And I mean, it's almost like a comedy routine. And it's so sad that this is what they are focused on. And it's why our adversaries like Xi in China and Putin in Russia, it's why they look at us and they laugh. Because President Biden is so focused on the far left green utopia that he's not focusing on real world concerns that everyday Americans had and how we are going to remain a strong country and pushing back against our adversaries. He's lost it. He has lost it. But in the critical mineral space, we've got to compete, and we have to make sure that we are rebuilding our national defense stockpile of critical minerals and doing it in a way that moves us away from our dependency upon China, but also building resources here in the United States of America, because we are not refining here and we're not allowing new permitting for these critical minerals. We need to exploit the resources that we have in the United States of America, whether it's critical minerals, whether it's energy. We can do this here if only we have an administration that will allow us to do it.
Senator, my last question for you, and you mentioned your daughter and now her service. When you look around the country, when you look at Iowa, what gives you hope?
It is those young people, Eric, and there are so many people across the United States, and I know all of you feel very strongly about our country and the pride that we have in our country. We have the richest country in the world, not just with our resources, but with our people. And the combination of our people, our resources, and our freedom and opportunities, it provides us such a strong path forward. If we take away part of that equation, then we are going to falter as a country. If we take away our freedoms, if we take away our opportunities, if we limit our resources, and if we're not encouraging pride with our people, then we are going to falter and ultimately fail as a nation. But what I see, and I travel all across Iowa every single year. Senator Grassley, he started all those years ago what he calls a 99 county tour. So he travels all 99 counties every single year in Iowa. I do it as well. I'm just wrapping up my 9th year of the 99 county tour. But every stop I make, I'm engaging with Iowans, and they love their state, they love our communities, they love our country so much. And I see these young people that are engaging in the workforce. They are going out to jobs. They're going out joining the service, which is a whole nother conversation for another day, Eric. But there are still those that are choosing to serve because they believe in our country. You know, when I see that, I'm heartened. I have just spent the last week and a half back and forth at the Iowa State Fair. There are kids there, and they're kids. They're 16-year-olds. They're 17-year-olds. They get up at 5 a.m. every morning. They go out and they are washing their cattle. They are scrubbing down their hogs to show at the Iowa State Fair. They are leading them around those show arenas. They are explaining how they raise their livestock to adults that are visiting, presidential hopefuls that are visiting. And I see the hard work and determination in their eyes, and I know that America's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. But we have to maintain all of those things that I outlined. You know, our freedoms and opportunities, our people and our resources. That's the strength of America. And we've got to lean in on that. I am an eternal optimist. If you didn't pick up on that, I believe in the goodness of our country. And there is so much more potential that's untapped out there. But it's up to us, it's up to this next generation to really dig in, lean in, and make sure that we're developing all of that and encouraging all of that. We've got to move away from these hard ideologies and these pie-in-the-sky dreams of everybody's going to drive an electric vehicle, okay? You know, let's just lean into what makes America good.
I would like to note for my daughter who's in the audience at 17 that a United States Senator defines you still as a kid. Remember that. You're not an adult yet. You're still mine. So thank you for coming. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks to all of you. God bless you.